The air in the Redemption First National Bank was thick with the metallic tang of fear and spent gunpowder. Dust motes disturbed by the sudden violence danced in the bars of afternoon sunlight, slanting through the tall windows. Outside, the world was a cacophony of panicked shouts and galloping hooves, but inside, a fragile, terrifying silence had fallen. It was the kind of quiet that follows a thunderclap, where every breath is a roar and every heartbeat a drum against the ribs. 17-year-old Serafina Cruz lay pressed against the cold marble floor behind an overturned mahogany desk, trying to make herself smaller, trying to disappear. The rough weave of her dress scratched against her cheek, a trivial discomfort in a world that had just been torn apart. Beside her, her father, Don Miguel Cruz, was a study in frozen fury. His face, usually a mask of imperious command, was pale, his lips a thin white line. He was not afraid. He was insulted. The idea that common bandits would dare to disrupt his business to point their crude firearms in his direction was an offense against the natural order of the universe. The leader of the outlaws moved through the terrified silence with an unnerving grace. He was not like the others, the brutish, dust-caked men who snarled and shoved. This man was tall and lean, dressed in a black duster that was worn but clean. His voice when he spoke was not the guttural bark of a common thief, but the calm, articulate baritone of an educated man. It was a voice that belonged in a lecture hall or a courtroom, not a ransacked bank. The assets of this fine establishment are now the property of a new ownership. He announced to the terrified room, his tone conversational, almost pleasant. Cooperation will be rewarded with continued existence. Resistance will be corrected. He walked to the center of the lobby, his boots making soft, deliberate sounds on the marble. My name is Silas Kane. Please remember it. I dislike having to repeat myself. Serafina risked a glance over the edge of the desk. She saw him, then his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. It was a handsome face, but hard-carved from unforgiving stone. His eyes cold and gray as a winter sky swept the room, missing nothing. It was then that her world tilted on its axis. As he gestured to one of his men, the cuff of his leather glove slid back, revealing a glint of silver at his wrist. It was a chain, and dangling from it was a small oval locket, intricately engraved with the image of a swooping swallow. The breath caught in Serafina's throat. It couldn't be. The locket was identical to the one her mother had worn every day of her life, the one now resting in a velvet-lined box on Serafina's own vanity. It was a unique design commissioned by her grandfather. There was no other like it in the world. Yet here it was in the possession of a bank robber, a killer. The image burned itself into her mind, the cold eyes, the calm voice, and the silver bird that belonged to a ghost. One of Kane's men shoved the bank manager toward the vault. Don Miguel, seeing an opportunity to reassert his dominance, rose slowly to his feet. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he demanded, his voice trembling with repressed rage. Silas Kane turned his expression unreadable. "I know exactly who you are, Don Miguel Cruz. You are a man who believes his wealth makes him immune to the realities of the world. Today is your lesson to the contrary. I will see you hang for this." Don Miguel spat, his composure finally cracking. Kane smiled, a chilling, humorless expression. "Many have tried." He nodded toward Serafina, who had flinched at her father's outburst. "Your daughter shows more sense. Fear is a rational response to a dangerous situation. Arrogance is not." The public observation of her fear and his lack of it was a deeper humiliation to Don Miguel than the robbery itself. He looked at Serafina, and for a fleeting moment she saw not a father looking at his frightened child, but a monarch viewing a subject who had shamed him at court. His eyes were chips of ice. The outlaws worked with ruthless efficiency, stuffing canvas bags with currency and coin. The entire ordeal lasted less than 10 minutes. As they prepared to leave, Silas Kane paused and looked directly at Don Miguel. "Consider this a withdrawal, Don Miguel," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was more menacing than any shout. "The first of many. There is a debt between our families, and I always collect." With a final lingering look at Serafina, he turned and was gone, vanishing with his crew into the dust and chaos of the street. The aftermath was a blur of noise and confusion. The sheriff arrived, blustering and useless. Townsfolk gathered, whispering their eyes, flicking from the shattered bank door to the formidable figure of Don Miguel Cruz. He stood amidst the debris, his empire momentarily breached, his authority publicly questioned. He ignored the sheriff, ignored the concerned murmurs of his associates. His gaze was fixed on Serafina as she was helped to her feet by a trembling bank clerk. "You," he said, his voice low and venomous. "You embarrassed me," cowering on the floor like a frightened mouse. "A Cruz does not show fear." "Father," she began, her voice shaking. "They had guns." "Silence," he hissed. "You will learn discipline. You will learn what it means to uphold the honor of this family." He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh like talons, and pulled her toward the carriage. The ride back to the hacienda was suffocatingly silent. The red sand of the territory glowed under the merciless sun, and in the distance, buzzards circled like patient mourners over a landscape that was as unforgiving as her father's heart. Serafina stared out at the passing buttes and mesas, her mind replaying the image of the silver locket. It was more than a mystery. It was a premonition. The violence of the day was not over. For her, it was just beginning. The hacienda, usually a bastion of orderly tranquility, crackled with a tension that was thick and suffocating. The scent of her father's rage was as palpable as the aroma of beeswax used to polish the heavy Spanish furniture. It lingered in the long, cool hallways and clung to the velvet draperies. For 2 days, Don Miguel had barely spoken to her, his silence a far more potent weapon than his shouts. He was letting her dread build, letting her imagine the shape of her punishment. The breaking point came, as she knew it would, over the matter of Alejandro Vasquez. The marriage contract, a strategic alliance designed to merge the Cruz cattle empire with Vasquez's vast mining interests, was to be finalized. Vasquez, a man older than her father, with moist palms and a smile that never reached his predatory eyes, arrived on the 3rd day after the robbery. They sat in Don Miguel's study, the air heavy with the scent of leather and cigar smoke. Serafina felt like a prize mare being paraded before a buyer. "She is a fine girl," Vasquez said, his gaze lingering on her. "A little spirited, perhaps, but that is a fault easily corrected by marriage. Her spirit has become problematic," Don Miguel said, not looking at his daughter. "She has forgotten her duty. But she will be reminded of it." This was her moment. The robbery, the sight of the locket, the cold fury in her father's eyes, it had all coalesced into a single, unshakable certainty. Her life could not be this. It could not be a cage, no matter how gilded. "I will not marry him," Serafina said, her voice quiet but clear. The silence that followed was absolute. Vasquez blinked a flicker of surprise in his reptilian eyes. Don Miguel turned his head slowly, his expression one of disbelief. He had expected pleas, tears of futile feminine protest. He had not expected a flat, calm refusal. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. "I said I will not marry Senor Vasquez." She repeated, her hands clenched in her lap to stop their trembling. "I will not be sold to settle a business arrangement." The insult to Vasquez was secondary. The true crime was the defiance of his will, a public declaration of independence in the heart of his kingdom. It was the final straw. Her cowardice in the bank, compounded by this rebellion, demanded a lesson that would be remembered by all who served him. "You have sealed your fate," Don Miguel said, his voice devoid of all warmth. "You mistake my indulgence for weakness. You will learn obedience. You will learn the price of dishonor." The punishment began at dawn. The world was sheathed in a pristine, alien white. A late winter storm had swept through the territory, blanketing the high desert in 3 inches of snow. Don Miguel stood on the covered porch of the hacienda, a steaming cup of coffee in his gloved hands, his woolen coat lined with fur. He watched as 2 of his most loyal vaqueros dragged Serafina into the courtyard. They stripped her of her shoes and coat, leaving her in only a thin cotton chemise. "You have brought shame upon this house," he announced, his voice carrying on the frigid air. "You will walk this courtyard until your pride freezes, and you beg to honor the commitment I have made for you." The first step was a shock of exquisite agony. The snow was a bed of frozen needles searing her soles. Each subsequent step sent shards of pain shooting up her legs. The wind cut through her thin shift like a blade made of ice, turning her breath into crystals. She moved like a broken bird, her bare feet leaving faint, bloody prints in the white canvas of the courtyard. She passed the well where she had played as a child, the chapel where she had prayed for her mother, the great iron gate that led to a world she might never reach. She kept walking because the alternative, surrender, was worse. She would not give him the satisfaction. She would not beg. She focused on the memory of her mother, a woman of quiet strength who had endured her own arranged marriage with a grace that Serafina now understood was a form of defiance. And she thought of the locket, the silver swallow in the hands of a killer. That mystery was a hook in her mind, a question that demanded an answer, a reason to endure. An hour passed. Her feet went from painful to numbs, a blessing and a terrifying sign. She knew what it meant. She stumbled, catching herself on the icy rim of the well. Looking up, she saw her father on the porch, watching, his expression one of grim satisfaction. He was not a man who bluffed. He would let her freeze before he would let his authority be questioned. Unseen on the pine-forested ridge overlooking the hacienda, a man watched the scene unfold through the brass scope of his rifle. Zephyr of the Chiricahua Apache had been in redemption trading beaver and fox pelts when the bank was robbed. He had seen the chaos, had seen the tall outlaw leader, and had later seen Don Miguel Cruz drag his daughter away in a fury. Now, tracking a wounded buck, he had stumbled upon this private, monstrous theater. He understood cruelty. It was a fact of life in a land where peoples fought for survival. But this was different. This was not the heat of battle or the desperation of hunger. This was cold, calculated, a deliberate breaking of a spirit for the sin of wanting a choice. It was an evil that resonated with the stories his grandmother, a medicine woman, had taught him. That strength was measured not by the power to inflict suffering, but by the wisdom to prevent it. He had watched Serafina's bravery during the robbery. Her quiet fear was a testament to her sanity, not a mark of shame. He saw her now forcing herself upright after a fall, her small figure a testament to a will as unbending as her father's. Zephyr had every reason to ride away. Don Miguel Cruz was an enemy to his people. His daughter's fate was not his concern. But as he watched her stumble again, his grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. Cruelty to one is cruelty to all. He made his decision. It was reckless, an act that could bring the wrath of both the Mexican ranchers and the American cavalry down on his people. But it was the right thing to do. He began to move down the ridge, his moccasined feet silent on the snow-dusted pine needles. He was a ghost in the trees, a hunter preparing for the most dangerous quarry of all, a righteous rescue. He would use the element of surprise, the chaos of an attack, to get her out. As Serafina began another slow, agonizing circuit of the courtyard, focused only on the next step, she did not know that salvation, swift and tactical, was descending from the mountain. The plan formed in Zephyr's mind with the sharp clarity of a winter morning chaos. First, then extraction. He slipped an arrow from his quiver, its obsidian point a sliver of black glass against the snow. He knocked it, drew the bowstring to his cheek, and aimed not for a man, but for the heavy wooden post supporting the porch roof, inches from Don Miguel's head. The thwump of the arrow striking wood was a flat, ugly sound in the crisp air. The shaft quivered a sudden violent intrusion into the morning's grim ritual. Don Miguel's coffee cup shattered on the stone tiles as he dove behind a heavy chair. The vaqueros scattered their hands, flying to their pistols as they searched the silent, snow-laden trees for a target. Apaches. The cry came from Carlos Mendoza, the ranch foreman, his voice cracking with a fear that had nothing to do with the cold. A second arrow whistled from the ridge, striking the ground near the well, a deliberate miss designed to sow more panic. Serafina looked up, her mind moving through a fog of pain and cold. She saw the men running, heard the shouts, but the reality of the attack hadn't yet pierced her stupor. This was Zephyr's moment. While every eye was trained on the high ground, he moved. He sprinted from the cover of the tree line, a fleeting shadow against the snow. He moved with a liquid grace, his feet barely disturbing the white powder as he closed the 30 yards separating him from Serafina. She saw him coming, a tall figure, painted for war eagle feathers in his long black hair. She felt no fear, only a strange, surreal sense of inevitability, as if she had been waiting for him her entire life. "Do not be afraid," he said in perfect, unaccented Spanish, his voice a low whisper. "I am here to help." He swept his heavy winter blanket from his shoulders and wrapped it around her trembling body. The wool was warm with his body heat and smelled of sage and pine smoke. It was a cocoon of impossible safety. She looked into his eyes and saw not cruelty or calculation, but a fierce, protective determination. It was a look of such profound decency that it brought tears to her eyes, which froze instantly on her cheeks. "Can you ride?" he asked, lifting her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. "I think so," she whispered, the thought of escape a sudden fire in her veins. Zephyr let out a sharp, piercing whistle. A moment later, a paint mare, Sila, appeared at the courtyard gate, a ghost horse summoned from the wilderness. The sight of the horse of the Apache warrior holding the patron's daughter finally broke the spell of confusion. "He has the girl," Mendoza shouted, swinging his rifle around, but he couldn't get a clear shot. Serafina was a human shield. Don Miguel scrambled up from behind the chair, his face a mask of purple rage. "Release my daughter," he roared. "Take cattle horses, anything, but leave her." Zephyr paused at the gate, Serafina cradled against his chest. He turned to face the rancher. "I want nothing from you, senor," he said, his voice carrying with quiet authority. "A man who treats his own child with such cruelty has nothing I desire. She comes with me because she chooses freedom over your chains." With that, he swung Serafina onto Sila's back and mounted behind her. "Goodbye, Father," Serafina said, her voice clear and steady. "Love cannot be built on fear." "Shoot him!" Don Miguel screamed, but his men hesitated, their loyalty warring with the undeniable truth of what they had witnessed. In that moment of hesitation, Zephyr urged Sila forward. The paint mare exploded through the gate and up the mountain trail, leaving the shouts of enraged and conflicted men behind them. The pursuit began within the hour. Don Miguel, his fury honed to a razor's edge, hired the best tracker in the territory. A grim, silent man named Jedediah Stone. Known for his relentless ability to follow a trail others would deem impossible. Stone led a posse of 10 hardened ranch hands, their faces grim, their rifles loaded. The chase was a brutal ordeal through the treacherous snow-covered mountains. Zephyr pushed Sila hard, navigating game trails and frozen creek beds that would be invisible to most. He was not just running. He was thinking, laying a path that was both fast and deceptive. "They will follow our tracks in the snow," Serafina said, her voice muffled by the blanket. Her feet, which Zephyr had quickly wrapped in strips of cloth torn from his own shirt, were beginning to throb with a fierce, burning pain as life returned to them. "We can't outrun them forever. Snow hides as much as it shows." Zephyr replied, his eyes constantly scanning the terrain ahead. He pointed to a windswept ridge where the snow was being scoured away by the biting wind, leaving bare rock exposed. "We will walk where the wind erases our steps." For 2 days, They moved through a world of white and gray. The mountains were a formidable obstacle, their beauty a deadly mask for ravines' sudden blizzards, and the ever-present threat of the posse behind them. Serafina, sheltered but sharp-witted, proved to be more resilient than Zephyr had expected. She asked intelligent questions, observed everything, and endured the grueling pace without complaint. She learned to read the subtle signs of the trail, to understand the logic behind Zephyr's choices. Zephyr, in turn, showcased his profound connection to the wilderness. He found shelter in places that looked barren, made fire with damp wood, and located clean water beneath sheets of ice. He was a master of survival, his every action economical and precise. A bond began to form between them, forged in shared hardship and mutual respect. It was a silent partnership, expressed in the way he would steady her as she dismounted, or the way she would have a small, smokeless fire ready when he returned from scouting. On the third day, the posse closed in. They heard the baying of Stone's hounds echoing through the canyons. They were trapped on a narrow ledge, a sheer drop on one side, and an unclimbable rock face on the other. "This is it," Serafina breathed, her heart pounding. Zephyr said nothing. He dismounted and began uncoiling the rope from his saddle. He pointed upward to a gnarled pine tree growing out of a fissure 50 feet above them. "The hounds follow scent on the ground," he said. "They do not look up." The climb was terrifying. The rock was slick with ice, the wind threatening to tear them from their holds. Zephyr climbed first, securing the rope, then helped Serafina. Halfway up, her numb hands slipped. She cried out as she fell, but the rope held. Zephyr's arm, strong as iron, pulled her back. "I have you," he said, his voice calm in the howling wind. "Do not look down. Look at me." She did, and in his steady gaze, she found her courage. They made it to the top just as the posse appeared on the ledge below. They watched from the cover of the pines as Jedediah Stone stared at the tracks that simply ended at the cliff face. He scanned the walls, his eyes sharp, but the falling snow was already beginning to cover their path. After a long, tense moment, he shook his head in frustration and turned his men back. They had vanished. They had walked where the wind erased their steps. Safe for now, they were truly alone in the vast, unforgiving wilderness. The Apache camp was a living thing breathing in the shelter of a hidden box canyon. It was woven into the landscape, the hide-covered wickiups blending so perfectly with the red rock and juniper that they seemed to be a natural part of the earth. Smoke from small, carefully tended fires rose in thin, straight lines, dissipating quickly into the vast blue sky. This was Zephyr's world, a place of profound community and constant vigilance. As they rode in, a woman emerged from the largest wickiup. She was old, her face a beautiful map of wrinkles, her silver-streaked hair braided with turquoise beads. This was Nahal Zephyr's great-aunt, a revered elder whose wisdom was the bedrock of their band. Her eyes, dark and sharp as a hawk's, took in Serafina, assessing every detail of the exhausted girl wrapped in her nephew's blanket. "You bring a storm with you," Zephyr Nahal said, her voice like the rustle of dry leaves. Her Spanish was formal, precise. "She is a refugee from a different kind of storm," Grandmother Zephyr replied, using the term of respect. He explained what he had witnessed, the cruelty in the courtyard, the courage of the girl. Nahal's gaze on Serafina was intense, but not unkind. "The daughter of Don Miguel Cruz is a dangerous guest. Her father's reach is long, and his hatred for our people is deep." "I cannot change my blood," Serafina said, finding her voice. "But my path is my own. I chose exile over submission. I ask only for sanctuary, and I will earn my keep." A flicker of respect entered the old woman's eyes. "Words are wind, actions are stone. We will see what you are made of." Serafina's integration was a process of slow, humbling education. A skeptical warrior named Kalen watched her every move, his distrust a palpable force. He had lost his wife and child in a raid on a ranch, much like her father's, and to him, she was the face of the enemy. Nahal, however, took Seraphina under her wing, assigning her to tasks that were both tests and lessons. She learned to tan hides her soft hands, becoming calloused and strong. She learned to find the yarrow plant to soothe her still healing feet, and the bitter root that could sustain a person for days. She failed often. Her first attempt at grinding corn resulted in a gritty, inedible paste. Her early efforts at beating were clumsy and uneven, yet she persevered, driven by a fierce need to prove her worth. During this time, her bond with Zephyr deepened. He taught her the ways of the warrior, how to move silently, how to read tracks, how to understand the language of the birds that warned of approaching danger. She, in turn, shared her own knowledge. She taught him to read and write English, a skill he recognized as a powerful weapon in a world increasingly dominated by written words and treaties. The mystery of the locket remained a constant thrum beneath the surface of her new life. She began to piece together a puzzle. Zephyr told her of his own family's tragedy, how they had been driven from their ancestral lands years ago by a land grab orchestrated by a powerful rancher. The details were vague, lost to the trauma of displacement. Her first real clue came from a cautious friendship she forged with an old vaquero from her father's ranch, a man named Mateo, who sometimes met Zephyr's people for discreet trade. Mateo had served the Cruz family his entire life and harbored a secret loyalty to Seraphina's mother. One evening, under the cloak of a moonless sky, Seraphina asked him about her father's early days, about how he had built his empire. Mateo was hesitant, his eyes darting nervously into the darkness. "Your father? He was a very ambitious man, señorita," he whispered. "He came to this territory with nothing. The land he claimed, there were others there before him. An Anglo family, the Canes. They had a small ranch, but rumor was they had found a silver vein in the mountains." Seraphina's heart went cold. What happened to them? Mateo shook his head, crossing himself. "One winter of fire. The official report said it was an accident. The whole family, gone, all except their boy Silas. He was away at school back east. When he returned, there was nothing left for him. Don Miguel had already filed a claim on the land, citing an old Spanish grant. It was all very legal, very tidy. The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture of horrifying clarity. Her father's empire was built not on shrewd business, but on a foundation of theft and quite possibly murder. The Cane land, the silver mine, the man named Silas. A week later, the puzzle's final damning piece fell into place. Kalen and his warriors scouting a supply train route brought back news. Silas Kane's crew had struck again, but this was no simple robbery. They hadn't just taken the cargo, they had systematically burned every wagon belonging to Don Miguel Cruz, leaving those of other owners untouched. It was a targeted personal attack. Zephyr and Seraphina rode to the site of the attack. The scene was one of devastation. The skeletal remains of wagons smoldered against the twilight sky. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burnt canvas and wood. Amidst the wreckage, half buried in the ash, Seraphina found a heavy iron lockbox, its contents mostly destroyed by the fire. But two items had partially survived. One was a land deed charred at the edges bearing the name of Jonathan Kane. The other was a letter, its elegant script faded but still legible in places. It was from Silas Kane's mother to her sister, written weeks before the fire. In it, she spoke of her husband's discovery, of a rich silver vein, and their growing fear of their neighbor, a ruthless man named Miguel Cruz, who wanted their land. And she described a gift she had just received from her husband, a beautiful silver locket engraved with a swallow, a symbol of their hope for a prosperous future. Seraphina held the scorched fragments in her hand, the truth of physical weight in her chest. Silas Kane was not just a robber. He was a son seeking vengeance. The locket wasn't a stolen trinket. It was a sacred relic of the life her father had destroyed. And she was the daughter of the man who had stolen everything from him. The conflict was no longer about her survival or her freedom. It was a tragic inheritance, a blood debt passed down from one generation to the next, and she was standing at the heart of the reckoning. The revelation at the burned supply train settled upon Serafina like a shroud. The world she had known was a lie, her comfort built upon a foundation of atrocity. Silas Kane was no longer a villain, but a figure of tragedy, a man warped into a monster by her father's greed. Her own identity felt fractured, the daughter of a tyrant and the heir to a stolen kingdom. She was caught in a web of someone else's making, and every thread was soaked in blood. Her turmoil was a private storm, one she shared only with Zephyr. He listened, his face impassive, but his eyes filled with a deep understanding. His people knew the story of stolen land and broken families all too well. This is his war. Serafina, not yours, he told her, his hand resting on her shoulder. You do not have to carry the weight of your father's sins. But she did. She felt it every moment of every day. She was a Cruz. That name, once a source of pride, was now a brand of shame. Silas Kane, it turned out, knew exactly who she was. He had been watching, gathering information with the same meticulous patience he applied to his robberies. He knew she had fled her father, and he knew she had found refuge with the Apache. He saw not an enemy, but a potential pawn, or perhaps a kindred spirit, another victim of Don Miguel's tyranny. The message arrived via a captured courier, a frightened young man from a neighboring ranch. He was brought into the Apache camp bound but unharmed, carrying a letter addressed specifically to the daughter of Don Miguel Cruz. The council of elders gathered as Serafina broke the seal, her hands trembling. The script was the same elegant, educated hand from the letter she'd found in the ashes. Señorita Cruz, it began. I know of your predicament, and I find a certain poetry in it. We are both prisoners of your father's legacy. He took my future, and he sought to steal yours. This creates a common cause between us. I am offering you a choice. I intend to dismantle your father's empire piece by piece, until he is left with nothing but the dust he built it on. You can help me. Provide me with information schedules, routes, weaknesses. In return, I will give you my solemn promise that I will steer my war clear of your new friends. The Apache will remain unharmed, and you will be free. Or you can stand with your father by action or by silence. If you do, I will consider his allies my enemies, and I will burn everything you now hold dear to the ground. Your choice. You have until the next full moon, S. Kane. The letter was a declaration of war on her soul. It was a moral vice tightening with every word. Help the man who had terrorized her, a killer and a thief, to destroy her own father. Or stand by and watch as he potentially unleashed his fury on the people who had saved her, who had become her family. She read the letter aloud to the council. A heavy silence fell over the gathering. Nahal's eyes were filled with a profound sorrow. Kalen, the skeptical warrior, stared at her, his expression a mixture of suspicion and grudging sympathy. He saw the trap as clearly as she did. This was a test designed by Kane to isolate her, to turn her new family against her. He seeks to use you as a weapon against your father. Nahal said, her voice grave. But in doing so, he also makes you a threat to us. If we are seen to be allied with him, the army will have the excuse it needs to wipe us out. And if she does nothing, Kalen added, his voice rough, this Kane will see it as betrayal. He will come for us to punish her. They were watching her, all of them. Their trust so hard won now hung by a single fraying thread. Was she truly one of them, Serafina Redstone? Or was she still Serafina Cruz, bound by blood to the man they all hated? For days, she was tormented. She walked the canyons, the letter a burning weight in her pocket. To betray her father felt like a violation of a sacred primal law, no matter how monstrous he was. But to endanger the people of this camp, To risk Nahal Zephyr and all the others who had shown her kindness was unthinkable. Zephyr found her sitting on a high ledge staring out at the vast, indifferent landscape. He sat beside her, not speaking, simply sharing the silence. "What should I do?" She finally whispered the question raw with anguish. "What does your heart tell you is the right path?" he asked. "Not the easiest path, not the safest, the right one." "My heart is silent," she confessed. "It's just afraid." "Then we will listen to our minds," he said calmly. Silas Cain is a man driven by vengeance. Such men are predictable. They believe their cause is just, which makes them blind to the evil they commit in its name. Your father is a man driven by greed. He is also predictable. He will sacrifice anyone, including you, to protect what he has. He paused, letting the words sink in. They are two sides of the same coin, Seraphina. Both are tyrants. The question is not which one you should side with. The question is how you can find a path that sides with neither. His words were a ray of light in her darkness. He was right. Cain's offer was a false choice, a trap designed to force her to pick a side in a war where both kings were villains. Her purpose was not to choose a lesser evil, but to find a third way, a way to protect the innocent, to stop the cycle of violence, and to forge a peace that was not based on vengeance or greed. She would not be Silas Cain's spy, nor would she be a passive victim. She would become a player in her own right. She sent a message back with the freed courier. It was short and unequivocal. "Mr. Cain, this is not your war to wage, nor is it mine to assist. The innocent will not pay the price for my father's sins. I will find another way. S. Cruz." She signed it with her old name deliberately, a declaration that while she may be the daughter of Don Miguel, she was not defined by him. It was an act of defiance against both men. She did not know if it was bravery or foolishness. But as she watched the courier ride away, she felt for the first time since reading the letter that she was no longer a pawn. The game was now hers to play, and she knew with a chilling certainty that the final confrontation was coming. The full moon rose over the territory, a luminous, watchful eye in a sky of black velvet. It was the deadline Silas Cain had given her. Seraphina's refusal had been an act of defiance, but it was also a gamble. She had chosen no side, and in doing so had made herself an enemy to both. Cain's response was swift and brutal. He did not attack the Apache camp. He did something far more insidious. He sent a message to Don Miguel, a simple taunting note, revealing that his daughter was alive and living with the very people he paid the cavalry to hunt. He enclosed a small eagle feather, a symbol of her new allegiance. For Don Miguel, this was the ultimate betrayal. His daughter had not been a victim. She had been a willing traitor. His humiliation was now complete. He assembled a force not of trackers, but of killers, a private army of mercenaries with orders to bring her back and to eradicate the Apache band that had harbored her. But Cain's machinations were not finished. He orchestrated a final dramatic confrontation. He sent another message, this one to Seraphina. "I have your father. Meet me at the old mission church in the Cinder Flats at dawn. Come alone, or he dies. We will settle this once and for all." The Cinder Flats were a desolate, windswept expanse of volcanic ash, a place where nothing grew. At its heart stood the skeletal remains of an abandoned Spanish mission, its adobe walls crumbling, its bell tower silent. It was a place of ghosts, a fitting stage for the end of a feud. As dawn approached, a fierce sandstorm descended upon the flats, a churning wall of red dust that swallowed the landscape. Visibility dropped to mere feet. The wind howled like a banshee, a physical force that tore at clothes and stung the eyes. It was within this maelstrom that Seraphina rode alone, or so it appeared. Zephyr and a dozen Apache warriors were with her, moving like phantoms through the storm, their positions communicated by the soft, mournful calls of owls, a sound lost to the wind, for any but the most trained ear. Zephyr had a rifle, but he knew a clear shot in this chaos would be impossible. He could only be her shadow, her last line of defense, if her own plan failed. Seraphina entered the ruins of the church. The wind screamed through the gaps in the crumbling walls. Sand sifted down from the collapsed roof, piling in drifts against the fallen pews. In the center of the nave, lit by a single flickering lantern, stood Silas Kane. Beside him, tied to a wooden pillar, was Don Miguel Cruz, gagged and bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but alive. His eyes, when they met Seraphina's, were filled with a venomous hatred. "You came," Silas said, his voice calm amidst the tempest. "I confess I wasn't sure you would." "Let him go," Seraphina said, her own voice steady, refusing to betray her fear. "Your fight is with him. Settle it with him." Silas laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "My fight is with his name, his legacy. You are part of that legacy. I gave you a chance to sever yourself from it. You refused." "I refused to become a killer like you," she countered, "or a monster like him." The ticking of a broken clock in the bell tower, its hands long since rusted in place, echoed unnervingly in the nave. A frantic heartbeat against the roar of the storm. Zephyr was in position outside a collapsed wall rifle ready, but he could only see fleeting silhouettes through the swirling sand. "He destroyed my family for a vein of silver," Silas said, his voice taking on a raw, painful edge. He walked over to Don Miguel and ripped the gag from his mouth. "She-devil traitor," Don Miguel spat at his daughter. "You did this. You brought this on us." Seraphina ignored him, her eyes locked on Silas. "And you have become the very thing you claim to hate. You terrorize the innocent. You use fear as a weapon. How does that make you any different from him?" "The difference," Silas said softly, drawing a pistol and pressing it to Don Miguel's temple, "is that my cause is just." He looked at Seraphina, and she saw the abyss of his grief, the endless emptiness that his revenge could never fill. It was in that moment that he revealed his final devastating piece of information. "Did you know," he said, his voice cracking with emotion, "that your mother knew she knew what he did? She found out about the fire, about my family. She was horrified. She tried to help me. She secretly sent me money for my schooling, small amounts funneled through the church. She was trying to atone for his sins." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, worn leather pouch. From it, he took Seraphina's mother's silver locket, the one from her vanity. "She gave me this before she died. She made me promise I would use my education to seek justice through the law, not through violence. A promise I kept for 10 years. But the law is for men like your father. It protects the rich and powerful. So I broke my promise. I chose a different kind of justice." The world seemed to stop. Her mother, her quiet, sad, gentle mother, had been a secret dissident in her own home, an ally to the boy her husband had orphaned. The memory of her mother was no longer simple. It was a complex tapestry of courage, sorrow, and secret rebellion. The locket was not a clue to a crime, but a symbol of a failed peace, a mother's last hope for a world without vengeance. This was the opening Seraphina needed. She saw not a monster, but a broken man clinging to the memory of his mother, just as she was. "My mother was right, Silas," she said, her voice softening, filled with a compassion that was her true weapon. "She knew this path would destroy you too. Look at us. 2 lockets, 2 mothers, both lost to the same tragedy. Don't let their memory be a curse that fuels an endless war. Let it be a blessing that ends it." She took a step closer, her hands open and empty. "Give me the locket, Silas. Let her rest. Let them both rest." For a long, agonizing moment, Silas stood frozen, the gun to Don Miguel's head, his face a torment of grief and rage. The howling of the wind was the only sound. Then, with a choked sob, his resolve shattered. The gun wavered. It was all the time she needed. She lunged forward, not for the gun, but for him. She grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "It's over," she whispered. The pistol clattered to the sandy floor. Silas Kane, the fearsome outlaw, collapsed, his body racked with the grief of a lifetime. The storm outside began to subside, as if its fury had been tied to his own. As the sandstorm's fury abated, the first rays of the rising sun pierced through the thinning red haze, casting long dramatic shadows through the ruined church. The howling wind softened to a mournful sigh. Into this sudden, profound quiet, Zephyr and his warriors materialized from the dust, silent and imposing. They moved with purpose, surrounding the tableau in the nave, Serafina standing over the weeping Silas Kane, and Don Miguel still tied to the pillar, staring in disbelief, his world utterly dismantled. Serafina had won, not with a bullet or a blade, but with a truth that was sharper than either. She had disarmed Silas Kane by appealing to the last shred of the good man he might have been, the boy his mother had loved. She had chosen mercy over vengeance. Zephyr placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of quiet affirmation. His warriors took Silas into custody, treating him not as a vanquished foe, but as a man deserving of a reckoning, not a lynching. "He will face a trial by our laws." Zephyr said, his voice low, but firm, loud enough for Don Miguel to hear. "He will answer for the violence he has committed, but he will be judged by a council of elders, not by a hangman's noose." It was a promise of justice, not blind retribution. A broken and humiliated Don Miguel was cut free. He stumbled forward, his face a ruin of pride and fury. He looked from his daughter to the Apache warriors, unable to comprehend the new order of this world he no longer controlled. One of Zephyr's men handed Serafina the burned land deed and the letters they had recovered. She walked over to her father and held them out to him. "It's over, Father," she said, her voice devoid of triumph or anger, filled only with a deep, weary finality. "Your empire was built on lies. It ends now." A trusted ally, the old vaquero Mateo, had been waiting for their signal. He took the documents and rode for the territorial capital. With the deed and the letters as evidence, the legal foundation of Don Miguel's holdings would crumble. The authorities, armed with proof of his long-ago crimes, would strip him of his land, his mines, and his power. Serafina had one last conversation with her father amidst the ruins of the church. He looked at her, expecting condemnation, perhaps even a plea for forgiveness he would never grant. She offered neither. "I do not forgive you," she said quietly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Forgiveness is not mine to give. It belongs to the ghosts of the Kane family. And I do not hate you. Hate is a poison, and I will not drink it for you. I simply release you. I release myself from your shadow." She turned and walked away, leaving him alone in the growing light of morning. She did not look back. She was leaving him to his fate, a man made destitute not by a robber's greed, but by the slow, inexorable return of his own sins. She walked toward Zephyr, toward her new life. The red dust of the cinder flats coating her boots as she stepped out of the past and into the future. Months later, the land was healing. The high desert bloomed with the improbable colors of spring. In a hidden fertile valley, watered by a secret spring, a place long held sacred by the Apache, a new settlement was taking shape. It was not a temporary camp made for flight, but a permanent home built for the future. The wickiups were sturdy, interspersed with adobe structures, and irrigated fields of corn and squash. This was the first fruit of the precarious peace Serafina had forged. Her actions at the mission had sent ripples across the territory. The collapse of Don Miguel's empire and the revelation of his crimes had shifted the balance of power. The Apache, led by a council that now included Serafina's strategic council, were no longer seen as simple savages, but as a people with legitimate grievances and a capacity for sophisticated diplomacy. Negotiations with territorial authorities began difficult and fraught with centuries of mistrust, but holding a fragile seed of hope. Silas Cain had faced his tribal trial. He was not executed but sentenced to a life of service, his skills redirected from destruction to protection. He became a scout for the Apache, guarding their new home, his life a long, quiet penance for the violence he had wrought. It was a form of justice his own world could never have conceived. One afternoon, a rider arrived carrying a letter for Serafina. It was from a lawyer in the capital. It confirmed that with the legal dissolution of Don Miguel's assets, the original Cain estate had been reclaimed. But it also contained a final surprise, a last whisper from her mother across the years. A small, legitimate plot of land adjoining the Cain property. A plot with its own deed purchased and held in trust by the church was now legally hers. Her mother, in her quiet, courageous way, had secured a piece of the future for the daughter she knew would one day need a place to stand that was entirely her own. In the final scene, Serafina stood on a ridge overlooking the bustling new settlement. The valley was alive with the sounds of life, children's laughter, the ringing of a hammer, the murmur of conversation in both Apache and Spanish. Zephyr stood beside her, his hand in hers, their partnership the quiet center of this new world. In her palm she held the 2 silver lockets, her mother's a symbol of quiet courage and a desperate hope for peace, and Silas's mother's a symbol of a stolen future and a love that had been twisted into a legacy of vengeance. They were the ghosts of a war that was finally over. She could have kept them, worn them as reminders of the path she had walked. But she knew that the future could not be built while still shackled to the relics of the past. Beside them, a young sapling, a cottonwood tree, had just been planted, a sign of their commitment to this new home. Serafina knelt in the soft earth at the base of the tree. With her own hands, she dug a small hole. She placed the 2 lockets inside, side by side, the silver swallows gleaming in the last light of the setting sun. She covered them with soil, burying the feud, burying the sins of the past, and planting a new story in their place. As she stood, she looked out at the valley, at her home, at the future she had chosen and fought for. Her journey, which had begun with a punishment of walking barefoot in the snow, had led her here. She was no longer a daughter of a tyrant or a refugee between worlds. She was a builder of bridges, a planter of trees, a woman who had found her own strength not in vengeance, but in the fierce revolutionary act of creating peace.